At the south end of the Atlantic City Boardwalk, where Boston Avenue meets the sand, there is a 20-story tower with 330 dark rooms and a price on it. The number is $50 million. The lights have been off since 12:01 in the morning on January 13th, 2014, and no one has been able to turn them back on since. The building is not a ruin. It is intact, openly for sale, and for more than a decade, it has been impossible to use. You can drive to the south end of the boardwalk today and see it. The listing is real. 3,400 Pacific Avenue, 20 stories, $50 million, and one line in the brochure that says, plainly, the hotel is currently shut down. That building was the Atlantic Club when the lights went out. When they first came on, it was Steve Wynn's Golden Nugget, the first casino he ever built from the ground up. This is a story about a casino that once earned more than the 7 casinos around it combined. And the night a man carried $1,100,000 in small bills through its front door. About the 2 competitors who bought its body in a single afternoon, one took the slot machines, the other took the walls, and then wrote a rule to make sure no one could ever run a casino inside it again. About the gold-plated toilet carried out of Frank Sinatra's private apartment on the top floor and sold in the end for $4,250. And here is the part the ghost building story always leaves out. It was never abandoned. Someone has owned it and wanted it. Every single day it has stood there dark. To understand how a building this valuable became impossible to use, you have to go back almost 50 years to a tired motel called the Strand and the young casino man who bought it just to knock it down. In 1978, Steve Wynn paid $8.5 million for the Strand Motel at Boston Avenue and the Boardwalk and tore it to the ground. The motel was tired, low, and unremarkable, the kind of building a city stops seeing. Wynn did not want the building. He wanted the corner it stood on. Here is the thing about the money. Almost none of it was his. The man who had come to define the modern Las Vegas resort was 36 years old, and what he owned was a stake in a small golden nugget operation out in Las Vegas and a debt he had inherited from his father, a bingo man who died owing money and left his son the business and the balance both. To build on the boardwalk, Wynn borrowed. He borrowed through Michael Milken and the firm of Drexel Burnham Lambert, the people who had turned high-yield bonds, junk bonds, the paper no bank would touch at face value, into a machine that could finance a man who owned almost nothing. By the time the ground was broken, Milken had raised about $112 million. In the end, the financing reached something close to $160 million. To understand why any of this was even possible, look at what New Jersey had just done. On November 2nd, 1976, the state's voters approved casino gambling, the first place in America outside Nevada to allow it. They did not do it to make anyone rich. They did it to save Atlantic City, a resort town that had been dying by inches for 30 years, and they wrote the reason into the law itself: gambling as urban redevelopment, a last transfusion for a place already halfway gone. Governor Brendan Burns signed the Casino Control Act on June 2nd, 1977. The first casino resorts opened on May 26, 1978, and resorts did the sensible thing. It took an existing boardwalk hotel and put a casino inside it. So did the operators who came next. They bought a building that already stood, gutted the ground floor, and opened. It was faster, it was cheaper, and it was how the whole young industry worked. Boston Avenue mattered to Wynn for a plain reason. It was boardwalk frontage, the ocean on one side, and a newly legal industry on the other, and he intended to put something permanent on it rather than something borrowed. Wynn built from nothing instead. The Golden Nugget rose on the Strand's old footprint at a cost the sources still argue over, somewhere between $140 and $160 million, depending on the source. Picture the lot in the summer of 1979. The Strand is gone. Where it stood there is a cleared square of sand and rubble on the most valuable strip of coastline in the state, and every dollar going into it is borrowed on paper that had barely existed as a mainstream idea 10 years before. The groundbreaking itself is disputed. One account puts it in July of 1979. Another gives a precise September 5th. What is not disputed is what it took to get there. Milken needed 4 months to raise Wynn's first $25 million, a slow, grinding sell, one investor at a time. Hold on to that number and that pace. Both will matter later. The casino opened on December 12, 1980. A Rutgers chronology puts it 3 days earlier on the 9th. The contemporary Wire report says the 12th, and the 12th is the date to trust. It opened on a temporary casino license, not the permanent one, just enough paper to let the tables run, with something close to 500 rooms. 504 or 506, the count is not clean, and a showroom of 500 seats that the property called, without apology, the Opera House. There is a temptation here, and it should be named and then set aside. An $8.5 million motel became, in 7 years, a casino Steve Wynn sold for roughly $440 million. It is a staggering line, but it is not a clean multiple. A rundown motel and a finished casino resort are not the same asset measured twice, and the honest version keeps them apart. What is true, and stranger than any tidy ratio, is simpler than that. The most valuable thing on that corner was never the motel, and never quite the casino. It was the license, the land, and the borrowed money. From the first shovel, it was an object built to be sold. Every other early operator in Atlantic City did the same safe thing. They bought a hotel that already stood and put slot machines in the lobby. Wynn refused. That refusal is the decision the whole rest of this story hangs on. To build from the ground up meant Wynn controlled the shape of the thing. Every floor, every sightline, every dollar of financing. And it meant he did not have to hand control to a bank or an equity partner to do it. Milken's bonds were the reason he could. Converting a hotel meant inheriting someone else's building. Building from nothing meant the building was Wynn's own argument to make, and he wanted to make it. State the counterfactual plainly, because it is the point of the act. If Wynn had done the ordinary thing and converted a standing hotel, there is no first-from-scratch casino in Atlantic City, no proof that a small room could out-earn the giants around it, and, arguably, no capital and no template for the far bigger thing he would build 9 years later. The whole later history runs through this one choice to build instead of buy. The whole plan rested on one bet no one talks about, that the bonds would keep performing before the regulators lost their patience. And in New Jersey, in those first years, regulatory patience was thin. The man drawing the building was Joel Bergman. He sat at the board designing a from-scratch boardwalk casino that nobody had asked him to design, working out how to make 500 rooms and a 500-seat showroom feel larger than their footprint. Bergman had come up inside Wynn's orbit, and the account of how it was done survives. He gave a full oral history to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, decades later, before he died in 2016. Around him were younger designers who would carry the style forward. Paul Steelman, learning the trade inside Bergman's shop, and De Ruyter Butler, who arrived to the Atlantic City work in 1982. The look they built, compact, gold, deliberately rich, was a rebuke to the barns up the boardwalk. The building they made was small on purpose. In a market where the play was scale, more rooms, more floor, more everything, Wynn bet on a compact, expensive, tightly run house of 500 rooms against rivals with thousands. It was a contrarian bet, and it depended entirely on the license coming through. For a while, it looked as if it might not. In January of 1981, weeks after the doors opened on that temporary permit, New Jersey regulators pulled Steve Wynn out of the operation, temporarily removing him from participation while they investigated. The casino ran. Its builder could not touch it. The plenary license, the permanent one, the one that made the whole gamble real, did not come until later that year. There were hearings in September. Then, on October 13, 1981, the Casino Control Commission granted the license. 10 months after the state had pushed its builder to arm's length, the small room on Boston Avenue was fully, legally his, and it was about to become the most profitable building in the city. The thing to understand about the Golden Nugget at its height is that it was the smallest big room in Atlantic City, and it beat everybody. Start with the number that made the other 7 casinos furious. In the first half of 1981, before it even had its permanent license, the Golden Nugget earned $17.7 million. That was not the most in the city. It was more than the other 7 casinos in Atlantic City combined. A 500-room house, a fraction of the size of the barns up the boardwalk, was quietly taking in more money than all of its rivals put together. By 1983, it was the most profitable casino in the city, and it held that position while staying exactly as small as Wynn had built it. Picture the size of it. 500 seats in the Opera House against rooms up the boardwalk that held 10 times that. The whole industry it was topping was enormous. Around 23,500 people worked in Atlantic City's casinos by 1980. And the Golden Nugget out-earned the giants of it from a showroom a person could cross in a few dozen steps. That was the trick of the place, and it was deliberate. Not the most rooms, not the most floor, not the most seats. The most money out of the least building. How it did that had a name, and the name was Frank Sinatra. Sinatra did not merely play the opera house. He was the face of the place, the man in the advertisements, the reason a certain kind of gambler drove down from New York or in from Philadelphia on a Friday night. He kept an apartment at the top of the building, a private suite of more than 6,000 square feet, higher and larger than anything a guest could book, and he headlined a room that could not have held 1,000th of the audience, his name pulled toward the door. The compact luxury Bergman and Steelman and Butler had drawn on the board was, in the end, a frame for that name, a small, gold, expensive box built to make one marquee do the work of a stadium. On any given week, that marquee might carry Dean Martin or Sammy Davis Jr. or Dolly Parton or Lou Rawls or Don Rickles working the crowd. Think about that lineup against 500 seats. It was a small room selling the biggest names in America, and the arithmetic of that, a 500-seat house against a coast full of arenas, is the whole engine of the operation. The scarcity was the product. No one could get in, which was exactly why everyone wanted to. And the money that name pulled in did not come from a captive crowd killing an afternoon on an endless floor. It came from people who chose the place, who drove down the parkway on a Friday, who came for a show they could not get into anywhere else, and stayed at tables packed close enough to feel busy on a slow night. A big room has to fill acres before it feels alive. The Golden Nugget felt full at a fraction of the head count, and feeling full is its own kind of advertising. Behind the glamour sat the machine that paid for it. Milken's bond operation had matured into something formidable. By 1983, the man who had once needed 4 months to raise Wynn's first $25 million could sell $250 million of bonds in a single day. The slow grind of the early financing was gone. The money moved as fast as the marquee did, and the city around the Golden Nugget was, in these years, the center of American gambling. Not a satellite of Las Vegas, but its rival. According to the gaming historian David Schwartz, Atlantic City as a whole out-earned the Las Vegas Strip for much of the stretch from 1983 to 1999. The small room on Boston Avenue sat at the top of the most profitable gambling market in the country, which was itself, for years, beating the Strip. Walk the floor of it. A guest came off the boardwalk into a gold-lit room that was dense rather than sprawling. Everything close together, the tables and the showroom and the cage packed into a footprint the giants would have used for a single wing. There was no long march across an acre of carpet to find a game. The place was built to feel full, and at its height it was. The rooms were compact and expensive. The showroom held 500 seats and was impossible to book into. The name over the door was the biggest in the business, and the man behind the door was building his fortune on borrowed paper and a single contrarian idea that in a business obsessed with scale, a house could win by being the best small room in the market. It worked completely. It worked for years. And then, at the very height of it, the most famous man in America was about to put the whole operation on the wrong side of the state of New Jersey. This is the moment to talk about a single hand of blackjack, because it is the hand that put the most famous man in America against the state of New Jersey. By the early 1980s, Sinatra was more than a headliner at the Golden Nugget. He was its emblem, the top-floor tenant, the name that sold the room, the man whose face was the advertisement. And in gambling, that kind of standing can curdle into the belief that the rules bend for the man they revolve around. At the Golden Nugget for a while, most of them did. In 1983, at the tables, one of them would not. The accounts describe Sinatra, with Dean Martin nearby, pressing a dealer over how the cards were handled, demanding the game be dealt the way he wanted it dealt, rather than the way New Jersey law required, single deck, by hand, on his terms. For the player, it was a whim, the sort of thing a man of his stature had stopped expecting to be told no about. For the casino, it was a violation, because in New Jersey, the procedure at a blackjack table is not a courtesy the house extends to a favored guest. It is the law written into the regulations, and the house, not the player, is responsible for following it. Understand what was actually colliding here. On one side stood the single most valuable marketing asset the property had, the man whose face sold the room, whose name was the reason half the cars in the lot had made the drive. On the other stood a regulator that had spent years building a reputation for treating its own rules as untouchable, in a state that had legalized gambling only on the promise that it would police it harder than anyone. When Sinatra leaned on a dealer, those two things met, and only one of them could win. The Casino Control Commission came down on the property. How hard is a question the sources will not settle? Retrospective accounts put the fine somewhere between $25,000 and $250,000. The gap between those two numbers is wide, and it has never closed. The range itself is the honest answer. No one figure has ever won out, and picking one would be inventing certainty the record does not have. What is not in dispute is how public it got. One of the state's own regulators, Commissioner Joel Jacobson, went at Sinatra directly, calling him, in words that made the papers, an obnoxious bully. That was a New Jersey official on the record, describing the most beloved entertainer in America as a bully. Sinatra did not shrug it off. He stopped appearing in the state. The feud climbed all the way to the governor's office, with Thomas Keene drawn into the aftermath of a fight that had begun over the handling of a deck of cards. In time, Sinatra came back. The money and the marquee were too valuable to both sides for the estrangement to hold forever. But for a stretch, the face of the Golden Nugget would not set foot in New Jersey. There is a small, sharp irony sitting inside all of this, and it points straight back at the main story. The casino that could bend almost anything for Frank Sinatra could not, in the end, bend a single one of the rules that would one day kill it. Every new casino in America was being watched, but New Jersey watched harder. And for 10 months in 1981, that scrutiny nearly cost Wynn the whole thing. This is the external shock the Golden Nugget absorbed before it ever reached its peak. The state had built the strictest licensing regime in the country on purpose, precisely because it feared the industry it had just invited in. It had legalized gambling to save a city, and it was terrified of what gambling might bring with it. So it wrote a law designed to keep the wrong people out and watched every new licensee as though he were guilty until proven otherwise. When regulators pulled Wynn from participation in January of 1981 and held the plenary license through months of hearings, they were not singling out a criminal. They were stress-testing the whole model. The borrowed money, the junk bonds, the man who owned almost nothing building a casino on the boardwalk. The Golden Nugget took that hit from the outside and survived it. The license came on October 13th, 1981, and the survival is what makes everything after it land, because it established early that this place could take a punch from the most powerful gaming regulator in America and keep standing. And then it did something no one small is supposed to do. It beat everyone. The superlative is not a matter of interpretation. $17.7 million in the first half of 1981, more than the other 7 casinos combined. Most profitable casino in Atlantic City by 1983, in a city that was, by David Schwartz's count, out-earning the Las Vegas Strip for much of the years between 1983 and 1999. It held that peak not by growing, but by refusing to grow, the most profitable room in the most profitable gambling market in the country, and one of the smallest houses in it. No other casino in this era fits that description. Highest earnings, smallest footprint, both at once for years. The refusal was deliberate, and it cost real money to maintain. On May 31st, 1985, the Golden Nugget walked away from plans to build a second Atlantic City casino and took a $15 million loss doing it. Think about what that means. The most profitable operator in the city looked at expansion, at becoming one of the barns it was beaten, and declined, and ate a $15 million loss to stay small. The smallness was not a limitation Wynn was working around. It was the strategy, and he paid to protect it. So what displaced it from the top? Not a competitor, not a bigger room, not a recession, not a scandal on the floor. That is the inversion this act turns on. In almost every story like this one, the peak ends because something arrives to end it. A rival opens across the street. A market softens, a fire, a raid, a run of bad luck. Here, nothing arrived. The building was still the best small room in the best market in the country when its reign ended. What ended it was a decision. The thing that ended the Golden Nugget's reign was its own owner, cashing out at the very peak. And the reason Wynn was so willing to sell, the reason a man would walk away from the most profitable casino in Atlantic City at the height of its earnings, is the part of this story that never made it into a single annual report. Because at the very moment the numbers were highest, a federal file on the same building was getting thicker. While all of this was happening on the floor, the record earnings, the Sinatra marquee, the small room that beat everyone, federal investigators were quietly building a very different file on the very same address. Here's the fact that never made it into a single annual report. Go back to November of 1982. On a single occasion, a customer brought roughly $1,100,000 into the Golden Nugget in small bills. Not chips, not a wire, not a cashier's check. Cash in low denominations, the kind of money that takes a bag to carry and a story to explain. That transaction would later become one thread in a federal money-laundering investigation into what was moving through the building. Sit with the physical fact of it for a moment, because in this format, the juxtaposition is the whole point. On the nights the Opera House was selling out for Frank Sinatra, on the nights the small room was out-earning all 7 of its rivals, a man had walked through the front door with $1,100,000 in small bills. The glamour and the cash were not in 2 different places. They were in the same lobby. By the spring of 1986, the scrutiny had a shape. On May 7th of that year, the Washington Post reported that a federal grand jury was examining a possible $800,000 money laundering scheme, one that reportedly involved a Golden Nugget employee and transactions connected to drug trafficking. 2 days later, on May 9th, the reporting went further. Steve Wynn himself, along with an executive named D. Boone Wason, had been summoned to appear before that grand jury. The builder of the most profitable casino in Atlantic City was going to have to testify, set 2 facts side by side. This is the same stretch of years in which the Golden Nugget was the most profitable casino in Atlantic City, in which Milken could move $250 million of bonds in a day, in which Sinatra's name sold out a 500-seat room. The contrast is almost too neat. $250 million of bonds sold in a single clean day of high finance, and $1,100,000 in small bills carried through a door. The man on the marquee and the man on the grand jury summons were signing for the same building. And here is where the restraint has to be absolute, because the record demands it. A summons is not a conviction, and none ever came. The located sources do not establish that the Golden Nugget was ever convicted of laundering money, or that it ran any systematic scheme. What was documented was an investigation, a grand jury, a set of transactions, a pair of names called to testify. What was never documented was a crime proven against the house. Both of those facts are true, and the honest version keeps them both, without letting the investigation quietly become a verdict. But even held to exactly what the record supports, an investigation, no conviction, it changes how every number in this story reads. For 4 years, the most profitable casino in Atlantic City and a federal money laundering investigation were the same building. The place that beat all 7 of its rivals and the place a grand jury was asking questions about were not 2 casinos. They were one at one address at the same time, and everything so far was happening on the bright side of that single fact. Reframe the golden age with that in place. The record earnings, the Sinatra glamour, the contrarian genius of the small, expensive room, all of it real, all of it documented, was running in the same years, in the same walls, as a federal inquiry into cash nobody wanted to explain. And Steve Wynn's clean, triumphant exit, the one that made him a fortune, was a sale made while a grand jury was still asking its questions. The casino Wynn built was, at its brightest, a place under federal question. That is not a footnote to the golden age. It is the golden age, seen with the lights turned all the way up. So he did the most Wynn thing possible. With the file still open and the numbers still at their height, he sold. He sold to Bally. On January 19, 1987, the Bally Corporation agreed to buy the Golden Nugget for about $440 million. And according to the Los Angeles Times, the deal was structured to block a competing bid from Donald Trump. 7 years after opening the doors, Wynn walked away from the building he had raised from nothing, and he walked away rich. How rich is a figure worth attributing with care? A corporate history compiled by Funding Universe puts the pre-tax gain to Wynn's side at roughly $170 million. The tired motel, the borrowed money, the small room that beat everyone, all of it resolved for Steve Wynn into a 9-figure exit and a stake he carried west, out of Atlantic City, and back toward the desert. The sale was recorded that March. The man on the other side of it was a Bally executive named Richard Gilman. Gilman took control of the most profitable casino in Atlantic City and did the thing a national gaming company does with a trophy. He changed its name. The Golden Nugget became Bally's Grand, and that single word, grand, is the whole distance between the first owner and the second. Wynn had built a boutique, small on purpose, expensive on purpose, one marquee doing the work of a stadium. Bally did not want a boutique. It wanted a grand, a national brand's flagship, a name to match a portfolio. The walls did not move an inch. The idea of the building changed completely. There is a number to hold against that $440 million price, and it will land later in this story with some force. 26 years after Gilman signed for it, the same building's contents would be sold off in bankruptcy for a small fraction of what Bally paid. But that was decades away. In 1987, Bally had just paid one of the largest sums in the young industry's history for a small room on Boston Avenue, and it believed, as every owner after it would believe, that it had bought something it understood. That is the pattern the building now falls into, from Gilman onward, and it holds all the way to the end. The deed passes to a new owner. The new owner looks at the same building and sees something the last one missed. And the building lets them believe it, right up until it doesn't. For most of the next decade, it ran as Bally's Grand. Then, on December 15th, 1996, the deed moved again when the Hilton Corporation completed its acquisition of Bally Entertainment, a transaction worth roughly $3 billion in stock, plus the assumption of about $1 billion in debt. The casino Wynn had built from a cleared motel lot was now one line inside a hotel company's balance sheet. The man who had assembled that Bally casino empire and who would carry it into what became Park Place Entertainment was Arthur Goldberg. Goldberg built fast and did not last long at it. He died in October of 2000 at 58. By then, the building on Boston Avenue had already passed out of his hands and into Hilton's, its second name about to give way to a third, its new owner as certain as Gilman had been that the ones before had misread the place. The third owner did not see a casino at all. It saw a Hilton. And from the moment the deal closed at the end of 1996, it treated the building like one. When the acquisition closed at the end of 1996, the man running Hilton was Stephen Bolenbach, and Bolenbach ran a hotel company. A casino, to Hilton, was a lodging asset with a gaming floor attached, something to be branded, expanded, and filled with rooms. So the building took its third name, the Atlantic City Hilton. And Hilton did what a hotel company does. It added rooms. Roughly 300 of them went in around 1997, and over the years, the count climbed toward 801, a boutique that Wynn had built to be small, being steadily, deliberately made large. The casino empire Hilton had absorbed did not simply disappear into a lodging chart. Arthur Goldberg, the executive who had assembled it, carried the gaming side into a spin-off called Park Place Entertainment, so that for a stretch the building answered, through a chain of ownership, to the same man who had run Bally. But the logic that governed it was now Hilton's logic: rooms, brand, occupancy. And for a hotel company, the measure of a casino was how full the tower stood. For a while, it worked well enough. And then, 4 miles north, the market it had been built for simply moved. On July 3rd, 2003, the Borgata opened in the Marina District, a Las Vegas-style destination resort that had cost roughly $1.1 billion and carried 2,002 rooms. It was everything the Atlantic City Hilton was not: enormous, new, and pitched at gamblers willing to travel farther for something bigger. The man who ran it, Bob Bauner, stood at the opening and said of Atlantic City that this was the end of the beginning. He was right, and the small room on Boston Avenue was on the wrong side of it. A destination resort had just redefined the top of the market, and an 800-room hotel with a compact casino floor no longer had an obvious place in it. Borgata made gamblers travel farther for more. The Hilton's answer before long would be to make locals travel less for less. But that answer belonged to a fourth owner because Hilton was already on its way out. The exit came as part of a package. On September 27, 2004, an agreement was signed to move a set of casino properties out of the Caesars and Harrah's orbit. On April 27, 2005, that deal closed. 4 casinos, including the Atlantic City Hilton, sold for a combined $1.24 billion to an affiliate of Colony Capital. The private equity firm's chairman, Thomas Barrack, now held the building Wynn built, and its fourth owner would give it its last name. The fourth owner did not want a Grand, and it did not want a Hilton. It wanted a bargain, and then it wanted out. Barrack's Colony Capital took the building in April of 2005 at what turned out to be the worst possible moment to buy an Atlantic City casino. In 2006, the city's total gaming revenue peaked at about $5.2 billion, and then it began to fall. Not because of anything happening inside the building, but because casinos were opening in Pennsylvania, in New York, in Maryland, pulling the drive-in gambler away from the boardwalk one new floor at a time. The whole market Wynn had once topped was draining, and the building was caught in the drain. Colony's answer was to stop pretending the place was a destination. On July 7, 2011, the Hilton flag came down and the property became, awkwardly, the ACH. Then, on February 7, 2012, an executive named Michael Frawley unveiled a new name and a new idea. He called it the Atlantic Club, and he called it plainly the Locals Casino, a place that would stop trying to out-glamour the Borgata and simply be the neighborhood house, cheaper and closer and unpretentious. The name took effect that March. There was almost a different ending here, and it involved a poker company and $11 million that went nowhere. From late 2012 into 2013, Poker Stars and its parent tried to buy the Atlantic Club for around $15 million as a way into New Jersey's new online poker market. The company reportedly advanced more than $11 million toward the deal, at one point some $750,000 a week, before the whole thing collapsed into litigation, and by May of 2013, the Atlantic Club was allowed to walk away from it. After that, there was no buyer and no more time. In November of 2013, the Atlantic Club filed for bankruptcy. In December, its own competitors moved in for the pieces. A joint bid from Caesars and Tropicana worth $23.4 million for the whole property, split between them. On December 23, 2013, the bankruptcy judge, Gloria Burns, approved the sale and the shutdown and put it in the flattest possible terms. The horse, she said, was out of that barn. At 12:01 in the morning on January 13, 2014, the smallest big room in Atlantic City went dark for good. Roughly 1,600 people were out of work in a single minute. New Jersey's Casino Control Commission recorded the closure as removing 1,655 jobs from the industry's count. The union leader who fought over the severance, Bob McDevitt of Local 54, and a competing bidder named Belinda Meruelo of Sobe Holdings both watched it end. So did a Tropicana executive named Tony Rodeo, who was about to take delivery of the machines. There was a grim symmetry to who ended up in the room. The Atlantic Club was being bought and buried by the same kind of casino it had spent 30 years competing against. And the two winning bidders were not there to reopen it, though were there to divide it. Here is the fact that explains the next 12 years, and it is not decay. The casino was not padlocked. It was taken apart. When Tropicana and Caesars split the corpse, they split it cleanly. Rodeo's Tropicana took the gaming assets, 1,641 slot machines, 48 table games, and more valuable than any of it, the customer database, the list of who played and how much, for about $8.4 million. Caesars took the real estate, the building itself, for about $15 million. Two competitors had bought one dead casino and divided it between them in an afternoon. Then Caesars did something that shaped everything after. It sought an anti-gambling deed restriction on the building, a legal covenant to keep any future owner from ever running a casino there again. The former Atlantic City mayor and state senator James Whelan objected in public and named the motive as he saw it. Instead of maximizing the sale price, he said, they were more interested in limiting future competition. Whether or not that was the reason, the restriction stuck to the deed like a curse. The building sold anyway. On May 29, 2014, Caesars sold the real estate to TJM Properties for $13.5 million, and the long parade of rescues began. In July of 2015, plans for an indoor water park of some 81,000 square feet won approval, part of a concept priced near $165 million. It collapsed over financing in January of 2016. In 2017, a developer named Ronald Young proposed another water park, this one around $135 million. It collapsed over financing, too. A plan for Stockton University to take the building died in 2018. Then, on October 1st, 2019, TJM's Matt Bradley announced a sale to a firm called Colosseo, later reported at $25 million, led by a man named Rocco Sebastiani, who said his company was looking forward to working in Atlantic City and restoring such a great property. A few months after that sale, in January of 2020, the last of the glamour was carried out and sold. The contents of Sinatra's old top-floor apartment went to auction, piece by piece, and the gold-plated toilet from that suite, the one fixture everyone remembers, sold for $4,250. Colosseo, meanwhile, fought the deed restriction and lost the appeal in 2021. It pulled permits to reclad the tower in 2022 and 23. The condotel conversion it promised stalled, and in February of 2025, the state's Department of Community Affairs took over construction code jurisdiction of the building entirely. Meanwhile, the name itself did something the building could not. It reopened 3 miles away on a completely different casino. In 2011, Tillman Fertitta's Landry's had bought the old Trump Marina and, after a renovation, put the words Golden Nugget on the door. The name Wynn made came back to Atlantic City. The building that earned it stayed dark, and the money Wynn walked away with in 1987 did not sit still either. It became the Mirage, the Las Vegas resort he opened in 1989, the one historians actually credit with starting the modern mega-resort era, which is the quiet joke underneath the whole title. The casino that got called America's first mega casino was really just the one that paid for the casino that actually was, Wynn himself, looking back on the sale, put it plainly. He didn't think the place was going anywhere. A casino is a license and a crowd, and both can vanish in a single night. But the building is only concrete, and concrete has nowhere to go. The story everyone tells about this building is that it was left to rot. That story is wrong in one specific way. The legend is easy to believe because from the boardwalk it looks true. A massive dark tower, 20 stories of empty rooms dominating the south end of the skyline for more than a decade. Abandoned, the word people always reach for. A rotting ghost building nobody owns and nobody wants. The circumstantial case is real enough. Every announced rescue has failed. The structure is reported to have decayed. In 2025, the state had to step in and take over its building code. And the lights have been off since 2014. But it was never abandoned. Not for a single day. It has been continuously privately owned the entire time. Caesars, then TJM, then Coliseo. And in all those years it was permitted, litigated over, listed, and marketed without pause. Sebastiani's firm did not walk away from it. It fought a court battle for the right to change it. Bradley's company had marketed it for years before that. Count the rescues that were actually attempted, because the number is the argument. A water park, approved, and then lost to financing. A second water park, proposed, and lost to financing. A university that looked at it and passed. A condotel that got as far as permits and recladding before it stalled. Each of those was somebody deciding this building was worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, the opposite of a place no one wanted. For a few weeks in 2021, the dead casino even got a job. It played a dead casino. Zack Snyder's production used the shuttered building as a filming location, bringing in more than 200 cast and crew and spending more than $25 million locally. A real ruined casino, hired to portray a fictional ruined casino. And in April of 2026, the authorities approved 74 townhouses to be built on the ground beside it. None of that is abandonment. All of it is wanting. The truth is stranger and quieter than the legend. A building only looks abandoned when every attempt to save it has failed quietly enough that no one saw it happen. The failures were not silence. They were permits filed, deals signed, lawsuits argued, and financing that fell through at the last moment over and over for more than a decade. What the building never got was the one thing that would have ended the legend, an opening day. When the doors opened in 1980, Ursula Moralski was carrying drinks across that floor. When they closed for good 34 years later, she still was. She had started as a cocktail server at Steve Wynn's Golden Nugget, and she was a cocktail server at the Atlantic Club on its last night. And in between, she had worked the same floor under every owner the building ever had. 4 names went up over that door in her lifetime there. The Golden Nugget, Bally's Grand, the Atlantic City Hilton, the Atlantic Club. She served under all of them. She was not alone in it. A server named Anne-Marie DeLella had been there since the opening era too, one of a small number of people whose whole working lives were spent inside this one building as its name changed around them. Think about what that means against the story so far. Wynn built it and sold it and went to build the Mirage. Gilman renamed it, Bolenbach absorbed it, Barrick bought it and closed it. 6 owners came and went, each certain he understood the building better than the last, and Moralski outlasted all of them, carrying the same trays across the same floor while the sign outside kept changing. On the final night, the staff tried to hold on to each other. A worker named Annette Flack said she wanted them all kept together for the last shift, the way a family closes a house. The union leader, McDevitt, fought over what they would be owed. None of it changed the clock. The doors that had opened on a temporary license in 1980 were about to close on a bankruptcy order, and the people who had spent their working lives between those two events were about to become former employees of a building that would still be standing empty more than a decade later. At 12:01 in the morning, on January 13th, 2014, Moralski and roughly 1,600 other people were out of work. The state would put the official figure at 1,655. 34 years, one building, 4 names, one last shift. A cocktail server named Catherine Irizarry, closing out on that same floor, said the only thing there was to say. She never thought it would end this way. They were the last people to make the building mean anything. After them came the owners, the plans, and the years of dark. But the building they walked out of that night is the same building standing there now, and the people who lasted longest inside it were never the ones who owned it. If you drive to the south end of the Atlantic City Boardwalk today, to the corner of Boston Avenue where Wynn once knocked down a motel, the building is standing exactly where he left it. It is still there, 20 stories, 330 rooms, dark. The listing is still live at 3400 Pacific Avenue, marketed by a broker named Eddie Navarez. $50 million now, cut from 55, with that same line in the brochure saying the hotel is currently shut down. The marketing still gestures at the possibility of a casino license someday, though a court has already told this owner that the deed says otherwise. And beside it, where the parking lot used to be, the ground is being turned for 74 townhouses, approved in April of 2026, on the lots around the tower. Everything that made it a casino is gone. The casino is not. There is no dealer inside and no cocktail server. There is no table on the floor. Tropicana took all 48 of them. There is no slot machine. Tropicana took 1,641. There is no customer list. That went to Tropicana too, the most valuable thing in the building loaded out on paper. There is no Sinatra apartment on the top floor, no gold-plated fixtures, nothing of the marquee that once carried the biggest names in America, nothing of the count room or the 500-seat opera house. There is not a single light on across 20 stories. What is there is the tower itself. The same building that opened this story, intact, structurally whole, still for sale, standing at the end of the boardwalk with foundations for someone else's houses going in where its guests used to park. The boardwalk still runs past it. In summer, the crowds still move along the boards a few hundred feet away, toward the casinos that are still open, and the tower simply stands over them unlit, the largest dark thing on the southern skyline. Steve Wynn built it to last. It has outlasted the casino, the name, and every owner who was sure he knew what it was for. A tired motel called the Strand became Steve Wynn's Golden Nugget. Steve Wynn's Golden Nugget became Bally's Grand. Bally's Grand became the Atlantic City Hilton. The Atlantic City Hilton became the Atlantic Club. The Atlantic Club became a bankruptcy auction. A bankruptcy auction became a warehouse of slot machines and a deed that forbids a casino. A deed that forbids a casino became a water park that was never built. A water park that was never built became a condotel that was never built. A condotel that was never built became 74 townhouses in the parking lot, and so it stands at the south end of the boardwalk, 20 stories, 330 rooms, $50 million, dark against the ocean, waiting like every owner who ever held it for someone to decide what it is.